While the rest of Europe was panicking about energy bills in 2022, one country was quietly making $100 billion in profit. And most people still don't know how they pulled it off. Picture this. German families sitting in living rooms wearing winter coats indoors, choosing between heating and eating. UK energy bills up 300%. France rationing electricity. And then there's Norway. Citizens paying some of the lowest energy prices on the continent, while their government is banking record profits. Norway supplied 30% of Europe's gas during the 2022 energy crisis. They became the hero nobody expected. But here's what nobody's talking about. This didn't happen by accident. It was 50 years in the making. And the strategy? Genius. Almost suspiciously genius. But wait. Before we reveal how Norway pulled this off, do me a favor. Subscribe so you don't miss the next video where we expose the countries that found oil and completely destroyed themselves doing the exact opposite of what Norway did. Seriously, the contrast will shock you. Drop subscribed in the comments and tell me which country's oil story you want us to investigate next. Now let's get into how this all started. But first, you need to understand the decision that almost destroyed it all. The discovery that changed everything. December 23, 1969. The North Sea. A place so brutal that oil companies called it the graveyard. Waves the size of buildings. Storms that could flip a tanker. And somewhere in the middle of this chaos, a 34-year-old Norwegian geologist named Torleif Lovely was standing on a freezing oil rig, holding a rock sample that had just tested positive for oil. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from realization. Norway in 1969 was poor. Like really poor. Their main exports? Fish and lumber. That was it. The average Norwegian made less than someone in the UK or Germany. They were the overlooked cousin of Europe. But this rock sample? This could change everything. And here's where it gets interesting. Because most countries, when they find oil, do the same thing. They rush. They drill. They get rich quick. Or, at least they try to. Norway did the opposite. They paused. For 5 years. Why? Because they'd been studying what happened to other oil nations. Venezuela. Nigeria. Even the Netherlands, a rich, developed country that found natural gas in the 1960s and watched their entire manufacturing sector collapse within a decade. Economists even named it after them. Dutch disease. The Norwegian Petroleum Directorate published a study in 1970, for that should have terrified everyone. 54% of oil-rich nations experienced economic collapse within 20 years of discovery. Their currency strengthened so fast that exports became worthless. Corruption exploded. Inequality skyrocketed. The oil money disappeared into private pockets, while citizens stayed poor. So imagine you're the Norwegian Prime Minister in 1974. You've just confirmed your country is sitting on billions of barrels of oil. You could drill now, get rich in 5 years, win the next election. Or you could pause, plan, and risk looking like an idiot who let wealth slip away. What would you do? Norway chose the road nobody else had the patience to take. And that's when things got really interesting. The insane 10 rules. In 1974, the Norwegian parliament created 10 rules that would make them richer than Dubai. Without the inequality, without the corruption, without the gold-plated supercars. These rules were so radical that even economists thought they were insane. Rule number 1. The government would own 78% of all oil resources. Not oil companies. Not foreign investors. Norway. Compare that to the UK, who discovered oil in the North Sea at the exact same time. UK government ownership? 0%. They let British Petroleum and Shell take it all. Let me introduce you to Astrid, a school teacher from Bergen. In 1975, she was sitting in her small apartment watching politicians on TV debate whether to follow the UK model, basically giving away Norway's oil to foreign companies in exchange for some jobs and tax revenue. Astrid grabbed a pen and wrote a letter. One line still gives me chills. Don't let us become the next Venezuela. Don't trade our future for their profit. She mailed it to Parliament. She wasn't alone. Over 200,000 letters, like Astrid's, flooded government offices. Norwegian citizens were terrified their politicians would sell them out. And here's what's crazy. The politicians listened. Norway said no to big oil. They created their own company, Statoil, now called Equinor. Fully government-controlled. No shareholders in London or Texas. Just Norway. By 1990, Norway was retaining 85% of oil profits. Nigeria, with more oil than Norway, they retained 35%. The rest disappeared into foreign bank accounts. That's from an IMF report in 1992, and it's honestly heartbreaking when you see the numbers side by side. But here's the thing. The real genius wasn't even in the oil itself. It was in what Norway decided to do with the money. Because this next decision, this is what separated them from literally every other oil nation on Earth. And that's when they created the most powerful piggy bank on Earth. The $1.6 trillion secret weapon. While Dubai was building golden skyscrapers and Saudi Arabia was buying football clubs, Norway was building something invisible. Something nobody outside economic circles even knew existed. And it's now 10 times more powerful than anything Dubai ever built. In 1990, Norway created the Government Pension Fund Global. Terrible name. Incredible concept. Every single dollar of oil profit goes into this fund. Not most dollars. Not some dollars. Every single dollar. By 2024, this fund is worth $1.6 trillion. That's trillion with a T. To put that in perspective, this fund owns 1.5% of every publicly traded company on planet Earth. Apple? Norway owns a piece. Microsoft? Norway. Your favorite coffee chain? Probably Norway. Let me tell you about Lars. In 1995, he was 28 years old, working on an oil rig in the North Sea. Brutal work. 2 weeks on the rig, 2 weeks off. His salary? $85,000 a year. Massive money for a Norwegian in the 90s. But here's what made Lars different from, say, a Saudi oil worker making the same amount. Lars knew the oil wouldn't last forever. Because every Norwegian was told, from day one, that this was temporary wealth. While Lars was pulling in $85,000, his country was saving $50 billion annually into the fund. Lars could have retired at 40, bought a yacht, lived like a king. But he didn't. Want to know why? Because Norwegian culture had shifted. They started calling themselves oil fund babies, a generation raised to understand that the money in that fund wasn't for them. It was for their kids, their grandkids, for the future Norway that wouldn't have oil. Compare this to Saudi Arabia. Similar oil wealth, similar timing. But Saudi Arabia spent their money. All of it. Golden palaces, luxury cars, subsidies for citizens. And when oil prices dropped in 2014, Saudi Arabia had to cut pensions, fire government workers, and borrow money. Norway? Oil prices crashed 70% between 2014 and 2016. And Norway got richer. Their fund kept growing because it was invested globally, not dependent on oil prices. Today, that fund could give every single Norwegian citizen $300,000. Just cut them a check tomorrow. But they don't. Because the fund has one rule that's almost spiritual in Norway. You can only spend the returns, never the principal. The fund earns about 3% annually. That's roughly $50 billion a year. That's what Norway spends. The $1.6 trillion? Untouchable. If your country found oil tomorrow, would you trust your government to save it like Norway did? Or would it disappear like lottery winnings? Because honestly, most countries can't resist the temptation. But in 2014, Norway's discipline was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. And everything almost fell apart. Countries like Venezuela collapsed overnight. Their currency became worthless. People were literally starving in a country with the world's largest oil reserves. Norway? They got richer. But it didn't feel that way if you were Ingrid. Ingrid was 52 in 2015. She'd worked as an oil engineer for 25 years. Started right out of university. Worked her way up. Good salary. Stable career. She had 2 kids in college, a mortgage almost paid off, and a pension she'd been counting on. Then, one morning in January 2015, she got called into a meeting. 15 minutes later, she was unemployed. I thought it was over, she told a Norwegian newspaper later. 25 years in the industry gone. And I was one of 50,000. Norwegian oil sector unemployment hit 4.9% in 2015. Doesn't sound like much, but for Norway, that was the highest in 20 years. People were scared. The oil miracle was over. Except it wasn't. Because here's the surprise nobody outside Norway understood. They'd been preparing for this since 2006. The government launched a $15 billion stimulus package, funded entirely by the oil fund. But they didn't just hand out money. They retrained workers. Ingrid was offered a spot in a government-funded renewable energy program. 6 months of training. Full salary. New career in offshore wind. A University of Oslo study from 2016 tracked laid-off oil workers. 89% found new jobs within 8 months. Compare that to the UK North Sea oil industry, where only 34% of laid-off workers found new employment in the same time period. Why the difference? Norway had been planning the transition for almost a decade. While they were still making record oil profits in the 2000s, they were simultaneously investing billions into renewable energy. Not just solar panels and wind turbines, the entire infrastructure. Retraining programs. Green technology companies. Research universities. Between 2006 and 2015, Norway cut 35,000 oil jobs. In the same period, they created 120,000 renewable energy jobs. Ingrid today? She installs offshore wind turbines. Same salary as when she was in oil. Better hours. And here's what she said in 2023. I was angry at first. Felt betrayed. Now, I'm grateful. The government didn't just abandon US. That's the emotional core of Norway's strategy. Long-term thinking that actually protects people, not just profits. But while Norway was quietly managing their own transition, Europe was about to face the biggest energy crisis since World War II. And Norway? They were about to pull off a masterstroke that would make them $110 billion and earn them Europe's trust forever. That's when Europe realized Norway wasn't just lucky. They've been playing a completely different game. The 2022 masterstroke. February 24, 2022. Russia invades Ukraine. And Europe's energy system collapses overnight. Within weeks, Russian gas supplies to Europe dropped 80%. Countries that had been dependent on cheap Russian energy were suddenly in crisis mode. German energy bills spiked 300%. UK households were making impossible choices. Heating or eating. France started rationing electricity. This wasn't just an economic crisis. People were genuinely scared. Winter was coming, and millions of Europeans couldn't afford to heat their homes. And then everyone turned to Norway. Norway was sitting on 25% of Europe's natural gas supply. They had the infrastructure, the pipelines, the capacity. They could single-handedly keep Europe from freezing. But here's where it gets fascinating, because Norway had a choice. A very profitable choice. Let me introduce you to Klaus. He owns a mid-sized factory in Bavaria, Germany. Makes automotive parts. Employs 200 people. In March 2022, his energy supplier called him with devastating news. His industrial gas contract was being canceled. The new rate? 600% higher than his previous contract. Klaus did the math. At those prices, he'd be bankrupt in 3 months. That's when he got a call from his Norwegian gas supplier. Long-term partner. 20-year relationship. The Norwegian rep said something Klaus will never forget. We can help you. We're increasing supply. But we're not going to price gouge you like the spot market. We honor our contracts. Norway made a decision that month that cost them $200 billion in potential profit. They increased gas supply to Europe by 8%, but they refused to spike prices above their long-term contract rates. Let me explain how insane this is. The spot market price for natural gas in 2022 was 10 times higher than long-term contract prices. Norway could have torn up those contracts, sold gas at market rate, and made an extra $200 billion. Instead, they honored the contracts. A European Commission report from 2023 calculated that Norway's pricing discipline saved European consumers 45 billion euros compared to market rates. And here's the kicker. Norway still made $110 billion in profit in 2022, the biggest annual profit in Norwegian history. While Russia weaponized energy as a tool of war, Norway did the opposite. They became Europe's reliable partner, the country you could trust even in a crisis. Klaus's factory is still running today. He told a German newspaper, "Norway could have bankrupted us. Instead, they saved us." That's the difference between a partner and an opportunist. Would you turn down $200 billion in extra profit to maintain trust? Most countries wouldn't. Most companies wouldn't. Norway did. And that decision is paying dividends in ways that go far beyond money. European leaders now call Norway their most trusted energy partner. New long-term contracts are being signed. Infrastructure investments are being made. Norway is being integrated into Europe's energy future in ways that will last decades. But that trust? It's about to be tested in ways nobody expected. Because right now, there's a war happening that most people don't even know exists. And if Norway loses this war, Europe's energy security goes with it. The hidden war nobody's watching. Right now, 400 meters underwater, there's a battle happening that could determine Europe's future. And most people have no idea it's even going on. Meet Sven. He's 45, Norwegian Navy officer, stationed on a frigate in the North Sea. His job? Monitoring underwater activity near Norway's gas pipelines. "We detect suspicious activity weekly now," he told a Norwegian defense journal in 2024. "Submarines we can't identify. Underwater drones mapping our infrastructure. We just don't talk about it publicly because we don't want to cause panic." Here's what's happening. Norway's energy exports to Europe flow through 5 main underwater pipelines. These pipelines carry 80% of Norway's gas exports. If one gets severed, 30% of Europe's gas supply disappears overnight. And somebody is very interested in where those pipelines are. A NATO report from 2024 documented 17 confirmed incidents of infrastructure surveillance near Norwegian waters in the past 2 years. Russian submarines, unidentified underwater drones, research vessels that just happened to be hovering over pipeline routes. Remember Nord Stream? The German-Russian pipeline that mysteriously exploded in September 2022? That wasn't a warning. That was a demonstration. Someone showed Europe how vulnerable underwater infrastructure really is. Norway got the message loud and clear. Since 2023, Norway has invested $1.8 billion in underwater defense systems. That's more than some European countries spend on their entire navy. They're deploying AI-powered monitoring systems that can detect underwater vehicles, drone swarms that patrol pipeline routes 24/7, subsea sensors every 50 kilometers that can detect pressure changes, temperature anomalies, anything that suggests tampering. They've also militarized their response. Norwegian Special Forces now conduct regular underwater patrols. NATO has permanent surveillance vessels in Norwegian waters. There are classified response protocols that would activate within minutes of a detected threat. Sven again, this isn't paranoia. This is reality. Our pipelines are military targets. We defend them like military assets. If you were Norway, how much would you spend to protect Europe's energy? Because right now, they're spending more than most countries spend on their entire military budget. And they're doing it quietly, without fanfare, because they understand something most nations don't. Trust is maintained through action, not words. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. This underwater war isn't even Norway's biggest problem. Because Norway has 11 years to solve an impossible challenge. One that could make all of this, the oil fund, the trust, the partnerships, completely irrelevant. The 2035 dilemma. Norway has 11 years to answer an impossible question. How do you stay rich when your main product becomes illegal? The European Union has committed to carbon neutrality by 2035. That means drastically reducing fossil fuel imports. Several European countries are already banning new oil and gas heating systems. The UK will ban new gas boilers by 2035. Germany is subsidizing heat pumps to replace gas heating. Norway's economy is 22% dependent on oil and gas revenue. That's 2024 data. In 11 years, a massive portion of their income could simply disappear. Let me introduce you to Emma. She's 19, a climate activist in Oslo. Last year, she was outside Equinor headquarters protesting new oil exploration licenses. Her sign said, "Your profit is our future." Here's the twist. Emma's father works on an oil rig. Same one Lars worked on decades ago, actually. I've seen interviews with both of them. Emma says, "I love my dad. I don't blame him. But his generation needs to stop choosing short-term profit over long-term survival." Her father says, "I understand her anger. I'm angry too. But you can't just turn off oil overnight. People need energy. We need time." They're both right. And that's the impossible tension Norway is trying to solve. The Norwegian government released a white paper in 2023 outlining their plan. It's ambitious to the point of being almost unbelievable. $80 billion Green Transition Fund. Target: 100% renewable electricity exports by 2030. Here's what they're building. Offshore wind. 30 gigawatts of plant capacity. That's enough to power 30 million homes. Norway's current population? 5.5 million. They're building wind farms to power Europe. Carbon capture. The world's largest carbon capture facility opens in 2025 in Norway. It'll pull CO2 directly from the atmosphere and store it under the North Sea. The same place they got their oil? They're now using it to store carbon. Green hydrogen. $10 billion investment in hydrogen production facilities. The idea? Use Norway's renewable energy to create hydrogen fuel that can replace natural gas in industrial processes. It's brilliant in theory. But here's the brutal truth. None of this is proven at scale yet. Offshore wind is expensive and technically complex. Carbon capture technology is still experimental. Green hydrogen costs 3 times more than natural gas. A Cambridge Energy report from 2024 put it bluntly. Norway is betting their entire economic future on technologies that might not work at commercial scale. I've watched interviews with Emma and her father, filmed separately, saying almost the exact same thing. We're scared, but we're in it together. That's Norway in a sentence. Terrified of the future, but disciplined enough to prepare for it anyway. So will Norway pull off the impossible? Will they transition from fossil fuel giant to renewable energy superpower without destroying their economy? Or will they become the richest fossil fuel museum on Earth? A cautionary tale about waiting too long to change? We're about to find out. Because the clock is ticking. And unlike in 1974, when they had 50 years to plan, this time they have 11. The lesson. So here's what we learned. Norway didn't become Europe's energy king by accident. They didn't get lucky. They became it by doing 5 things that nobody else had the discipline to do. 1. They saved when others spent. Every dollar went into the fund. No exceptions. 2. They planned for failure when others assumed success. They studied countries that failed and learned from their mistakes before making their own. 3. They chose long-term trust over short-term profit. That 2022 decision to honor contracts instead of making an extra $200 billion? That's the definition of playing the long game. For they protected their infrastructure like it was a military asset. Because it is. Those underwater pipelines aren't just business, they're national security. 5. They started their next act before their first one ended. They began the renewable transition while oil profits were still high, not after they'd already disappeared. Remember Astrid? The teacher who wrote that letter in 1975 telling politicians not to sell out Norway's future? She's 78 now. Lives in a modest apartment in Bergen. Nothing fancy. No mansion. No luxury cars. Her pension? $4,200 a month. Comfortable, but not extravagant. Her country's savings account? $1.6 trillion. That's the deal Norwegians made. Individual modesty in exchange for collective wealth. And it worked. Norway proves something most countries refuse to believe. You can be rich and fair, powerful and trusted, capitalist and caring. You don't have to choose between profit and people. But here's my question for you, because this matters more than you think. If your country discovered massive oil reserves tomorrow, would you want them to follow Norway's model and wait 50 years to see results? Or do it the Saudi way and get rich now, even if it means your grandkids inherit nothing? Because honestly, most countries can't resist the temptation. Most governments would spend it within a decade. Most politicians would use it to win the next election rather than secure the next generation. Drop your country in the comments and tell me, could your government pull off what Norway did? Or would the money be gone in 10 years? I'll read every single answer because I'm genuinely curious whether this kind of discipline is even possible in other political systems. And if you want to see how Norway's biggest rival Sweden became the recycling superpower of Europe through an even crazier strategy, one that involved literally importing garbage from other countries, that video is next.